of off MLS listings was being left, give me one second, of listings being left off the MLS was starting to creep up in a lot of marketplaces. It was time to address the issue. So the advisory board last year, they took this up and decided that in doing so, that they also wanted to acknowledge that, this is a practice that kind of deviates, this off MLS practice was a practice that was deviating from really what the MLS has been and the development of it right over the last 100 years, which is an acknowledgement that distributing listing data through the MLS and cooperating with other participants is pro-competitive, pro-consumer. It's something that as a participant, when you join the MLS, you agree to share listing information and cooperate with others. And so they wanted to acknowledge that fact and get back to ensuring that all listing inventory available was being placed into the MLS to be shared cooperatively, but also for the benefit of consumers in the marketplace.
Excellent. Thank you for that description. And I know here at RMLS, it's certainly a conversation we were having for several years before this came down, and we had implemented some policies internally here with the RMLS, and I know we'll talk about those a little bit later, but it's just good to remember for everyone to keep in mind that this was designed to protect consumers and to create that equality amongst the industry, not just in the Portland Metro RMLS area, but around the country. So thank you, Renee, for that. Now I have a question. So it's called Clear Cooperation 8.0, which kind of begs the thought of, were there 7 versions of this beforehand, and how did we get to 8.0?
Sure. No, there weren't 7 different versions before we landed on this one. It was just more of a function of how we categorize policy statements within the handbook, and so the next section, if we will, that we created for the next policy just happened to be 8.0. That was a working name. If you look at our handbook, it's under the policy statements, it's under section 8.0. Under the model rules, you'll find it under section 1.01. So it's just a fancy numbering system that we use.
Excellent, thank you. Now we all know the mystery behind 8.0. So my next question is this: does this basically get rid of office exclusive listings? Can you tell us about that, please?
Yeah, great question. And it doesn't. This policy, I think, it's best understood as layering on top of existing policy. So we have, the longtime policy that's been in effect is some MLSs call this mandatory submission. Under NAR policy, it's listing procedure section 1, which says that all listings of the type described in the service area of the MLS must be delivered to the MLS. Full stop. That's the starting point. Then you layer on top of that the exemption policy or the office exclusive policy, which is if a seller instructs the listing broker to leave the listing off the MLS, it still must be filed with the service, but the service can now also require a signed seller certification. And then, so this is essentially the office exclusive. And then you layer on top the clear cooperation policy, which says, if you have a listing that has not been submitted to the MLS, typically the office exclusive, and you publicly market that listing, then you've acknowledged that there is no longer any privacy concern or safety or security concern of the seller. And therefore, it makes sense that you should report that listing to the MLS and share it with other participants. So it doesn't do away with anything. It doesn't ban or prohibit any specific marketing practice or business practice. It's just an additional requirement, not unlike the pre-existing requirement to submit listings to the MLS, which that has been the case, for forever.
Excellent, thank you. That's a great way to look at it and to give us an explanation on that. So appreciate that. Now, what if there's a broker or maybe a homeowner that says, you know what, I'd like to opt out of this policy. Can they do that?
So there's no opt-out provision within the policy, so no. It's important to have, for listing brokers, listing agents, to have that conversation with the seller, explain, and this works perfectly, right? Explain that you follow and adhere to code of ethics for realtor members, that you belong to an MLS, you follow the rules of the service, and how that helps you help the sellers and consumers, and helps you cooperate with other participants. So explaining all of that, and then explain that the policy, again, doesn't have a carve out or an exception to the exception. So it is a compliance issue where you have to follow that rule. Having that discussion with the seller and explaining why this policy exists, I think will help in their understanding why there isn't an exception.
Excellent. Thank you for that.
Sure.
So as you're talking about this new policy that NAR came up with and has created that now is live across the country, I guess the question becomes, so RMLS, it's our job to enforce this new policy. So I guess this question is going to go to Kurt. What happens if someone violates this new rule? What do we do?
So the short answer is that there can be up to a $1,000 fine for violating this policy. Now, there's two different ways. Subscribers at RMLS know how this works. There's two different ways to handle a violation. 99.9% of our violations are informal violations. Now, in case you don't know that, I want everyone to understand an informal violation is 100% anonymous. And an informal violation is the easiest way of turning something in. Basically, it means that you want staff to handle the issue. We will reach out and we will do basically all that we can to take care of the issue at hand. We all know, though, sometimes there are some violations that are just so egregious that, or maybe it's multiple violations, or maybe somebody is just not responding. Every now and then there comes time for there to be formal violations. And if this is a formal violation, that's when a fine can be in place. Now, a formal violation is not anonymous. There's some paperwork to fill out, and you have to do a little bit more work than the informal violation. But those cases are presented to our Rules and Regs Committee. Our Rules and the Regs Committee is made up of volunteer subscribers, just like yourselves, and they will be the ones to determine if A, there was actually a violation that took place, and B, if there was a violation, how much are they going to fine that individual? And in this case, a violation of Section 5.1 in our rules and regulations can be levied up to $1,000. So it'll be up to that committee to determine what happens next.
Excellent. So I want to stay on this topic for just a moment. As you started out talking about that informal violation reporting that is anonymous, would you please remind those subscribers that are listening, how do they go about doing that?
So it's actually super easy. Contact anyone you can. I mean, that's the bottom line. That's what it comes down to. Now, here's what we're going to do. So if you know of a staff member, tell them. If you want to call the help desk, tell the help desk. If you want to get on RMLS Web and submit a chat, do that. That's fine. You just want to contact your local RMLS office, you can do that too. It doesn't really matter. All of us are going to do exactly the same thing. We're going to collect all the information, and then we're going to send an email to rules@rmls.com. And that will start the informal violation process. That's basically your way of telling us, I found something, you guys go do something about it. And we will do our best to get that cleaned up just as quickly as possible. But really, the answer is simple. Just tell anyone that you can. And don't be afraid of it. It's 100% anonymous. Let us know, and let us get the marketplace as clean as possible.
Excellent. Thank you for the clarification. And keeping in that same track, what happens if an RMLS subscriber, they find a listing, or what usually happens is one of our clients reaches out and says, hey, I found this property. I want to know about it. And we go into RMLS and we don't find it there. In those circumstances, what does the subscriber do? What do we do in that case?
Just call us. I mean, just call anyone you can. That's exactly what we're trying to say, is that you can call any contact that you have. You can go directly to rules@rmls.com, or you can just call anyone you want.
Excellent. Perfect.
I mean, call anyone you want that works at RMLS. Don't call Home Depot or Safeway. They're not going to help you, but call us. That'll be fine.
We don't know what to do.
Right. Yeah. What's a listing?
Right on. So this actually seems pretty simple. 24 hours, we need to have the listing in the MLS. I mean, to boil it really down to the bottom line. So I'm curious, are there any other changes as a result of what the Clear Cooperation 8.0, that doesn't actually live in 8 now, we find out, not to confuse everybody though. So are there any other changes that are going to affect us here locally as subscribers of RMLS?
Yeah. So the new, so this new rule that's in effect today, um, I think the best way to talk about it is actually to talk about the name of the form. In a surprising twist, that actually works really well. The name of the form that you used to use to exclude the form or exclude a listing from the multiple listing service used to be called the Authorization to Exclude from MLS. It wasn't a very, like creative title, but that was what we called the form. That form is now called Authorization to Exclude from MLS and Public Marketing. So if you're going to exclude it from the MLS, you can't market it to the public. It doesn't boil it down any simpler than that. However, because of that change, we no longer have to have our 30-day penalty. If you remember, we used to have a sort of unique, I don't think it was entirely unique, but a sort of unique approach where if you excluded from the MLS in the past, you had to pick a date range. And then once that exclusion date range was up, you had a 30-day penalty tacked onto the end, which was sort of to signify to people, we don't really want you excluding this from the MLS and trying to sell it to yourself. If you're going to do that, it's going to come with this 30-day penalty. Well, that 30-day penalty isn't a thing anymore. There's no point anymore, because if somebody markets a property to the MLS, they have 24 hours to get it into the multiple listing service. It's actually a much cleaner approach. So for anyone who hated that 30-day penalty that we used to have, rejoice, for it is gone and we don't have to worry about it any longer.
Perfect. Well, that makes it easy, doesn't it?
It's really easy. The concept is simple. And my hat's off to NAR for making it as easy as it has been. Like, it's a very clear and easy to follow rule.
Absolutely. So I guess the question at this point, I think we've kind of summed it up, and Renee's given us the background and where we're at, and we've talked about how it affects us here locally. The question I have is, for those that are watching right now, are there any questions? If you have a question, please pop into the chat box, and I've just popped in there myself. I'm not seeing any questions specific, but this would be the opportunity to ask NAR or RMLS any specific questions about Clear Cooperation 8.0. And if there's any confusion or things that you need clarified, we would be happy to answer those for you. Oh, and just as people are doing that, there is a note in the chat that does say, with regard to reporting, if you are in a listing and you see something that is of issue that needs to be addressed, on the bottom right-hand corner, there's the report issue, and that button works really well. Click that, send the information off, and you'll hear back in short order with what the resolution is and what needed to happen. So that's another way to report. So looks like I see, hey Bila, how are you? What exactly is meant by having the listing submitted 24 hours prior to marketing? Kurt, Renee, which one of you wants to take that?
I'll take a stab at it first. The way I understand it, it's 24 business hours. It's one business day, right? So that excludes weekends and holidays. The definition of marketing to the public is pretty simple. I'll look to Renee to correct me if I'm wrong, but we're talking about a sign in the yard, email campaigns, social media websites, basically anything that involves communicating to the general public. Anything I should add, Renee?
Yeah, and I'll just add it. So it's the policy itself is one business day, and that was covered perfectly. And just to expand on the marketing, or just for background to help illustrate what the advisory board's intent was, they weighed, as they thought about putting the policy together, they weighed whether they should use advertising or marketing, and going back and forth on that issue, they understood marketing to kind of be the wider encompassing term, if you will. Advertising is a component of marketing, so they certainly wanted to capture as many activities as possible, or the broadest level of activities. So any marketing to the public, which means it could be anything from for sale sign in the front yard, a social media post, a snap, an ad in a magazine, a flyer that's placed on the bulletin board at at the market, any public communication. And it was important that they use public. They didn't want to cast such a wide net that you couldn't communicate with, your clients. So if you are having a one-on-one, if you have an existing client or someone that you're helping that's in the market to purchase a property, and you have that communication with them, that wouldn't trigger the clear cooperation policy. But it's important to distinguish, not to throw the term client around too much, right? So if you have a book of, 100 past clients, that doesn't mean that you can turn them on current existing clients and send them an email blast and exempt yourself from the policy. That wasn't the intent of the advisory board. So I just wanted to add that for some background and hopefully some understanding on what it is that they were after when they talk about public marketing.
Perfect. Thanks, Kurt. Thanks, Renee, on that. And Bailath, hopefully that answered the question you had and probably others as well. Next question we have is from Patty. And the question is, where are the instructions for entering into RMLS if it is to be excluded? Kurt, I'll let you take that one.
I'm not sure that we have instructions. There's a form, which is...
Yeah, it would just be an office exclusion, office exclusive.
It would be you would fill out the form that is entitled Authorization to Exclude from MLS and Public Marketing. There's no more instructions than that.
Perfect. So hopefully that takes care of your question, Patty. Thank you for that. And next question is, if a seller wants to exclude, and I'm reading these as they go, so I haven't pre-read it in advance. If a seller wants to exclude from RMLS, but still have the property marketed, how can they do that? That goes right back to, I think, the question I asked Renee about, can a seller opt out of this? And the answer is they cannot opt out of it. So Rick, if the property is being marketed, the rule, there is no exclusion from that. It does need to be input. I guess I'm going to answer this question. It does not need to be, or there's not an exclusion for that unless they want truly an office exclusive. And in that case, it's an office exclusive and it isn't being marketed publicly.
That's right.
Did I get that good, Kurt and Renee?
Nailed it.
That's great.
Perfect. Okay. See, I was paying attention. This is how I can get the information, is I need to just be moderating, and then I'm going to make sure I'm paying extra good attention. Let's see. What is a good email for sending a PDF to RMLS? Kurt, what would be the best email for someone sending a PDF?
Cheryl, I'll call you. I have no idea what PDF we're talking about. Cheryl, you could send me a PDF. I mean, it depends on what we're talking about. If you're filling out one of these forms, for instance, maybe this is what Cheryl's saying, is that if you're filling out one of these forms, you can send it to rules@rmls.com anytime you want. But when you get into Brookings, they're going to send it to their local office. Same with Hermiston. So it kind of depends on where you are.
Perfect. Great. Thanks, Kurt. So question or statement, please clear up coming soon listings. Can a sign still be put up, or will that be considered marketing? So if we have somebody that's chosen coming soon, Kurt, go pass that over to you.
Yeah, so you're allowed to have a coming soon listing up to 21 days in advance in the RMLS web database. You're allowed to have a sign as long as that sign clearly says coming soon on it. And you're allowed to have flyers in the flyer box as long as they say coming soon on it. All of that would still be allowed. This doesn't really change much about our coming soon policy. Our coming soon policies are still the same.
All right, so I'm going to take that one step further. That coming soon has 21 days, but in the second week, it's being posted on Facebook, and it is the coming soon sign has come off. I guess I would institute the clear cooperation, and they would have 24 hours to get it on the market.
That's right.
Perfect. All right. Hopefully everybody's catching that. So coming soon is just that. Nobody walks inside that house. It is coming soon. As soon as people start walking in the door, we have implemented clear cooperation 8.0.
Right.
All right. So Leslie Jones says, so an example of when to use the office exclusive would be representing a seller selling to an already identified buyer, neighbor, family member, or tenant. Well, you actually would be able to just file that as after, at the point of, Kurt, do you want to take that? I'm thinking
no, I don't want to take that.
that would be sold, not listed.
Yeah, I think that would be closer
a
to
sold, not listed
not
property.
listed.
That's where my brain goes with that one.
Well,
yeah.
I would maybe in answering that, I would take that a step further, and this might not be a clear cooperation policy question, right? The question that I would ask is there a listing agreement, yes or no? If there's a listing agreement in place, then you have to comply with the submission policy. Kurt, what's your turn-in time frame?
24 hours.
24 hours. So if you have a listing agreement in place, you have to turn that listing in to the MLS within 24 hours. If you don't have a listing agreement, lots of bells and whistles are going off in my head, but it's still possible that you got involved in that transaction somehow. Make sure you are talking to your broker and keep an eye on code of ethics issues. Or if you have a listing agreement and you have an office exclusive instruction, now my question would be, how did that customer come around, or that buyer come around? If it was as a result of marketing efforts, then you triggered clear cooperation policy. If a seller comes to you and says, here's my listing agreement, and by the way, here's a person who would like to purchase it, put the transaction together, and you sign the purchase agreement, everything in the same day, then you're likely going straight into a pending or off market status, and Kurt can touch on how that would be reported in your MLS.
Yeah, you could go straight into pending at that point, or if it's already put together, you could choose the sold not listed category as well, if that was more accurate.
Right, and I would imagine in those scenarios, that's probably where it's going to land, is there's already purchaser and seller that have already come together, and we're helping to facilitate a finalization, and at that point it is sold not listed. Mm-hmm. So hopefully that answers that question. And Daniel says, so do I understand correctly, you have 1 business day to enter a signed coming soon listing agreement into RMLS?
Well, not necessarily. So we do still have the date marketing to begin. So you could get your seller under contract and say, look, we're not going to start marketing this thing until June. And that would be fine. And that may be that we're going to start by saying, look, the paint isn't dry and the carpet isn't finished yet, so we're going to go ahead and start this as a coming soon listing, but I know they're going to be done in 2 weeks, so I'll just put this 14 days out. All of that would be fine. It doesn't really, just because you have a contract doesn't mean you have 24 hours to get it into the database. You still have the flexibility that you had beforehand. However, if you market it to the public, then you've got 24 hours to put it in the database. Like that's sort of the hidden caveat of every answer we're going to give. Every one of them ends with, if you market it to the public, you got 24 hours, bingo, 24 business hours.
Exactly. Thank you, Kurt. So the next question from Kyle, this is a good question. Are there any exceptions for new construction as times they have signs up and internet exposure prior to a live listing in RMLS?
So under the clear cooperation policy itself, the advisory board, so there's no blanket exception for new construction across the board. They did want to provide, they didn't want to cause a scenario where, multi-unit new development construction projects needed to input every single listing into the system. So new construction, there's no requirement to input every single unit but we got to distinguish that from, if you have a single property that's new construction, then that would be still covered under the clear cooperation policy.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Renee. Hopefully, Kyle, that answers your question. It sounds like if you've got, if you've got a listing that's people are walking in and out of it and it's being marketed, it falls under the same clear cooperation policy that it does need to be in the MLS. So Rick, this kind of rolls back to the question he asked earlier. So if they can't opt out, which the question was if a seller could opt out, and we've already said that sellers can't, do they need to do an exclusive agency, which would be not marketing the home? So I guess if the seller truly doesn't want the home to be marketed, then yeah, they would do an authorization to exclude, but then you're not marketing the property. Right. I think that, Kurt, am I seeing that right?
Yeah. I mean, that's how I'm interpreting it.
Okay, perfect. So hopefully that answers your question, Rick. If not, chime back in there with it. Let's see, are current authorizations to exclude grandfathered to pre-today rules? Does somebody, I guess I would translate the question is, does anyone need to do a new authorization to exclude today if they already had one signed yesterday before the policy went into effect?
I don't. So the authorization to exclude is not being grandfathered in. So if you had an authorization to exclude for a period of time and your goal was to market that to the public while not having it in the multiple listing service, the jig is up. If you market it to the public, you have 24 hours to put it into the multiple listing service.
That sounds good. Hopefully that clarified Mike's question. Thank you for the question, Mike. Sherry mentions the email address is on the bottom of the form. Yeah, if you're looking for a place to email it, the email address is also on the bottom of the form. John asks, I see that office exclusive listings are seen as important to some of our clients. What are other examples of things we can be doing to promote a listing that would not be public marketing? So Kurt already mentioned sign can be in the yard with the coming soon on it. There can be flyers in the flyer box with coming soon on it. Again, nobody's walking inside that house.
Right.
Are there other, if you end up in a public space, you've now crossed the marketing line, as I understand it. Kurt,
Right.
Are there any examples you can think of?
I can't. Renee, have you fielded this question before, Renee?
Well, I will note that what the goal of the policy, right, was to get that listing into the MLS, and it sounds like you have a implementation that allows for that. So once it's in your service, the goal of the policy has been met.
Right.
Now, if you have additional requirements or how you managing that's different. Really, the purpose of the policy was to ensure that all participants and subscribers of the service could get access to and could go in and look up all listing inventory. So once it's there, we're good. If Kurt and RMLS, they have different requirements on how they status those listings or when they move over to an active or fully visible status. That would be local implementation issue. I see that there's other questions about marketing, so I can get into that aspect of it if we wanted to.
Roll right into that, Renee.
Cool. So public marketing and within the policy, and we give some examples, right? Public marketing includes, but is not limited to, and that's the key, right? It's not limited to, this is just some examples. Flyers displayed on windows, yard signs, digital marketing, really anything that you put out public facing that advertises the property, that's going to trigger marketing, public marketing. Social media posts, snaps, whatever you're using, as long as if it's something that leaves the brokerage, then that'll likely trigger public marketing.
If you're TikToking that house, it's public.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you for answering that as well. So Daniel asked the question, did I hear it said that we need to now submit our listing documents to RMLS? I guess you're asking if we actually need to turn listing contracts into RMLS, Kurt?
Yeah, no.
You're still going to turn those into your broker.
Enter the listing into the database, but we would know what to do if everyone started sending us your documents.
Absolutely. And I did pop over to the Q&A because we have chat and then there's also a Q&A. So no more yard signs allowed. No, coming soon is absolutely allowed to have a yard sign. It has to identify that it's coming soon. And any flyers or perma flyers need to identify that it is coming soon. So you can have that documentation on the listing itself, or on the coming soon, I should call it, but you have to make sure that that sign says coming soon and that nobody's walking inside that house. Again, if somebody's walking in that house, you have crossed the line and it is now publicly on the market, and you have to have it in the MLS within 24 hours going back to clear cooperation. Let's see, the next question in the Q&A is, if you have a listing that will be ready to go in 3 days, then you must put it in as a coming soon within 24 hours. Whereas before you could set the extended launch date as long as you didn't market it. You can still have a listing date down the road. Like Kurt said, you could have a listing that doesn't go live till June or July. And as long as you can have your client sign that paperwork, and if their date to go live is June 15th, as long as you've done nothing to market that property until June 15th and it's not having people walk in and out of it, then you're fine. You don't have to do a exclusion or a coming soon in that case. If you wanted to coming soon, you can only do the 21 days. And again, you can put a sign in the yard and you can put flyers in the box as long as everything says coming soon. So,
You know, Dale, one of the things that I wanted to point out was that there's a ton of information on our newsletter page.
yeah,
NAR did a fantastic job. They have a great video available for everyone to watch. I recommend everyone watch that. There's also the NAR policy itself. If you want to dive in and, you know, you're not into the brevity thing, you can read the entire policy. There are also our changes to the RMLS rules and regulations. Those are red line changes available for everyone there. We also have our podcast covered this recently. So if anyone's into podcasts, John and Beth just did one on that. There's a ton of information available. When I worked in the help desk, I invented a phrase that was international dateline questions. There's always some international dateline question. And an international dateline question goes like this. I signed the listing agreement and I start marketing it. It's 24 hours. I'm supposed to put it into the MLS, but then I cross the international date line and I have another 24 hours. I actually got that question when I was at the help desk, and I know that those questions exist. And it's a little bit tongue in cheek, but there's always these sort of fringe cases that exist. There's always like that one thing that you don't have an answer to. Call us. Talk to us, open up a conversation. I do want to put in a shameless plug for the RMLS virtual classroom. Every subscriber can sign up for a 1-hour session, just one-on-one time with one of our trainers. And we've made that available since the beginning of this global pandemic. So this would be an excellent time to sort of sit down with someone if you have lingering questions and things that aren't being, you know, it's just that for some reason it's not resonating. Sit down with a trainer and we can do that as well.
absolutely. Absolutely. I don't see any additional questions in here. So with that, then I guess we will bring this to a close. And I just want to thank each and every one of you. Oh, somebody popped in something. Okay. Apparently there's in the chat room.
Someone got my reference to the Big Lebowski. Nice. Well done.
Very cool. Okay. So hopefully this was good clarification for everyone. It's intended to, again, create equity amongst all of the realtors in our area, and it's pro-consumer. It's to provide the best information possible for all of our buyers. For all of the people we have looking for properties, we want them to be able to have access to the homes. And that's really the whole point of this, is to create a good experience for the consumer and equity for all of us so that we know what's going on. There is a question that popped in. Where can we watch the video of this session? I imagine we're going to post a link to it on the desktop that Kurt was just talking about. And we could probably post it. I'm just going to say this. We should be able to post it on the Facebook page as well.
Yeah, I would think so. Why not?
So
even though Facebook didn't really help us out earlier, you know what? I'm kind of mad at them, but we'll put it up there. That's fine. So,
but this on Zoom has been a whole lot better. So we figured out how to make this work. I'm thankful for everybody for sticking with us and being able to pivot and shift in quick order. Renee, thank you for having an account that we could jump into quickly while we were trying to figure this out. So I want to, Robert posted here from RMLS that it's going to be posted on the social channels, YouTube, email it, and on the desktop. Always remember, make sure that you check the desktop. There's a lot of really good information. If we need to share anything, you're going to find that information on the desktop. So with that, Renee, thank you so much for being here. If everybody can give Renee a round of applause. And
thank
Kurt,
you, Renee.
as
appreciate
always,
that.
thank you for everything.
We really
applause
appreciate it.
To you all.
Thank you.
And with that, I'm going to bring this to a close. And thank you all so much for being here today. Have a great day. Stay safe. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. All right. Renee, thank you.
Of course. Thank you, guys.
Looks like Kurt bagged out. So I'm going to hop off of here as well, because I have I'm one of the people in your seat on a call in 2 minutes.
Very cool. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. I look forward to hopefully seeing you at annual.
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks for everything, Renee. Take care.